As someone who streams building games reasonably often, I was pretty excited for Cities Skylines 2, but saying the reality of Skylines 2 isn't quite what I had hoped for is an understatement, and it seems I'm not really alone in feeling this way, with a slew of videos from massive creators saying that they have essentially benched the game, which is something I did a few weeks ago too. Many of us, myself included, were eagerly awaiting Skylines 2, hoping it would push the boundaries of city building simulations. And of course, it's natural for expectations to be tempered upon release, especially with the promise of DLC down the line. But the disappointment in Skylines 2 has been palpable and runs deeper than just a slight letdown. Unlike the transition from, say, SimCity 4 to SimCity 2013, Skylines 2's biggest issues are not immediately apparent, which is why, like many people, at first I was willing to give it a chance, as it seemed like a lot of the negativity was focused on one aspect. Let's address the performance elephant in the room first. Performance issues, they aren't my top concern. I have to turn it down for streaming anyway, and the video in the background is about as good as I can get it to run stably, which is totally fine for me. I am okay with that. But I'm not dismissing them out of hand, as it does obviously detract from the overall experience for many players, especially when the game just starts randomly lagging, just like I am obviously aware of and hit numerous bugs. After every stream, if I was particularly perplexed by something like a building not working as advertised, I found myself Googling solutions, only to stumble on threads. Countless people experiencing the exact same problems, and these bugs, they range from things like the water physics just being completely bizarre to game-breaking things like the dreaded land value issue. From a lot of the videos I've seen, I think Colossal's announcement that bug fixes will now be tied to the DLC schedule is a key reason for why a lot of creators are benching the game. However, what truly ruins Skylines 2 for me personally is its lack of a clear identity. It feels like there was a tug-of-war during development between making a true simulation and creating more of a city drawing art thing. At first, it's small details like the low cost of infrastructure and terrain manipulation that hint perhaps towards more of a city drawing game. It becomes more apparent as you dive further into the game with a city that's actually growing though. That's when you start to notice that the simulation has an awful lot of smoke and mirrors. Skylines 2 promised a slew of new features and improvements like the ability to trade with neighbouring cities, or manage production lines, or more closely handle transit and traffic. These ideas, when compared with much older games that have similar features, they often end up feeling inconsequential or half-baked. I built a city on stream called Hades Town, you're looking at it in the background, intending it to be a hellish nightmare of high taxes, poor funding, low education, and pollution. But the game was just too easy. Resource management between the cities felt like cheating with an infinite pool of money. Sure, residents moaned on Chirper about the pollution, but they still moved in their droves. My fail city ended up thriving, and it made me question the game's ability to provide a meaningful challenge. You see it with real civil engineers challenge videos as well. It's extremely difficult to fail. A chunk of my stream would end up being chat and myself conversing about the systems and the things that we would have done differently, and there were a lot of things that we picked apart. The traffic system, for example, is something that you really need to nail for a simulation like this. And it's just another area that doesn't feel right. They had mods to lift ideas from, and there are a few things like turning rules and roundabouts, but traffic management makes little sense with random traffic jams cropping up out of nowhere for no real reason, and new systems they've added seem to just be ignored when you try and use them. So you might think, okay, I'll add transit to help with the traffic. Unfortunately, managing transit feels like pulling teeth compared to something like Transport Fever, and it has been proven by some creators that it doesn't actually do anything to traffic levels, meaning it's just another art thing. It's entirely superficial. So as I was streaming, once I realised that the city wasn't going to collapse, I pivoted into trying to make Hades Town a nice place to live, by using some of the experience-based items, like the transit systems. But it all just felt pointless. The city was thriving without them, and I had millions in the bank, and when I did try and build these items, they either didn't work properly or they cost a lot for no real measurable change. Let's say they did want to make the game more arty. What's most perplexing about it being driven more towards a visual aspect is they failed that brief. I mean, I don't have an artistic bone in my body, so I've never made a city to make it look good. But even I can tell there's a severe lack of customization options. It's another thing where you look back at much older games like Planet Coaster, where you could dive into various menus to change how everything looks. It just has so many more customization options compared to today's Skylines 2, which is extremely basic. Also, despite not being particularly visually motivated myself, I really think some of the game just looks ugly. If you put farms or quarries around, you get a drab brown box with random assets that spawn in a very disorganized fashion. The rubbish landfill seems to have had more time spent on it than these, and I do wonder if that's a consequence of the game having been released well before it should have been. Another video I watched from someone who does make very pretty cities has said that they feel like all of their cities feel the same and look the same in Skylines 2, and even though it's an aspect that I don't play the game for, I can see how that makes a tedious experience and why they would want to bench it. So in conclusion, there's still hope for Skylines 2. If No Man's Sky and Cyberpunk can both have a miracle, well, why not Skylines 2? But it is clear that there are significant changes needed to redeem it in both the eyes of players and creators, and they may have to pick a direction, art or simulation. As for me, if the push is to make something that is easy but you can draw fantastic looking cities, well, that's not what I'm after. But I do remain cautiously optimistic that the developers will listen to the feedback and steer Skylines 2 back on track, whether it be an art track or a simulation track. So yeah, thanks for listening, and as always, don't forget the likey subscribey stuff, and your thoughts are invaluable, so be sure to share them in the comments below. Bye!